Arlecchino has just come out, and in this video I'm gonna share some of the best teams you need to play her in. While doing so, I'll explain all the things you need to know when it comes to these teams, and I'll mention all sorts of different variations for these teams so you can pick and choose which variation is the best for you. With that said, let's get right into the video. We're gonna be kicking things off with Vape Arlecchino. Now, Vape has always felt great to play, but I gotta say, with Arlecchino, legitimately to me, it's never felt better. Arlecchino plays very seamless in the team. She's not tied down to any sort of rotation whatsoever, so when playing her, you can go full offensive and attack enemies as much as possible. And best of all, her damage output is actually incredibly impressive. She's able to hit some exceptionally high Vape numbers to the point where she can actually just obliterate enemies. Now, granted, the enemies you're watching now are pretty tanky, so you're not going to be able to see this, but were they to be any other sort of enemy, legitimately, by now they'd be dead. No doubt this is mostly thanks to her great scalings and such, but also thanks to Yelan's damage increase, Kazuha's buffing and grouping, and of course Benny. With both Benny and Kazuha, energy is no problem at all for Arlecchino, but the same can't be said for Yelan, since she is the only Hydra in the team. So be sure to equip her with some energy recharge and aim for about 200%. Now, while this team is my favorite team to play, Arlecchino is very squishy in it. See, Arlecchino has this unique talent where she gains a massive 40% pyro damage bonus, but she can't be healed by anything other than her burst. And don't be fooled like I was. It's not that Arlecchino can be healed by someone, but she then loses the 40% pyro damage. She literally cannot be healed by anyone. This makes her survivability quite low, since you'll have to solely rely on her burst as a source of healing. As such, you'll likely find yourself dying a decent bit. To offset this, you can include a shielder in her team, the best being Zhongli. With him, you'll never have to worry about dying as Arlecchino. However, you will notice the drop off in damage Arlecchino will have. It's not a devastating change by any means, but you'll definitely be able to tell it. To heavily mitigate this, be sure to run 4 Archaic Petra, since as long as Zhongli picks up a Pyro Crystallized Shield, Arlecchino will gain another 35% pyro damage bonus. For Tenacity of the Millelith is another good set if you don't have Archaic Petra. Next, Thoma with 4 Noblesse is also a pretty good option, especially if you have him at C6 where he'll buff normal attacks. There's 2 more honorable mentions, and the first is Double Hydro. Here it makes a return, and honestly a pretty strong one at that. Since Arlecchino is constantly normal attacking, the duo of Yelan and Xingqiu go perfectly with her. While it lacks grouping and AoE damage, it makes up for this in high single target damage. Then is the free-to-play version of Vape, which, if I'm being completely honest, is actually really good. In it, you'll have Bennett, who enables a good portion of damage. Xingqiu is always great, and with his damage mitigation, he becomes really useful for Arlecchino. And then Sucrose. Sucrose is especially good since she'll increase the EM of Arlecchino, which is actually a rare and vital stat to have when it comes to Vape. This team alone is incredibly strong, but if you change Sucrose to Xiangling, now you have National Arlecchino, which obviously needs no introduction. It's a stupidly strong team with just 4 stars. If you're new to the game and you only have 4 stars, believe me, don't worry, these teams are actually broken. Now, while Vape is an already established team comp for Pyro units, I've cooked up a team that isn't, but I'm telling you, is really good. The team I've been cooking is solely focused on Arlecchino. Everyone here is to buff her damage, and it's apparent. Here, Arlecchino can deal upwards of 80k, 90k, and sometimes even 100k normal attacks. Now, granted, the first 2 team comps dealt similar damage to this, upwards of 120k. But see, this was with reactions. Here, of course, there are none. So, Arlecchino's personal damage in this team is actually really high. Like, legitimately in this team, she feels as though she's like C6 or like an Archon or something. Like, it's actually crazy. She is legitimately juiced up to the gills. And that's the thing with this team. Beyond it feeling really good and being really fun to play, it's a very high damage team. And I gotta say, a good portion of this team's success lies with Yunjin. Yunjin is a bit of a niche support that doesn't get much attention nowadays, but honestly, with Arlecchino, she should be getting a bit of a resurgence. Playing her with Arlecchino feels great, and they synergize perfectly. Yunjin will massively buff Arlecchino's normals, of which she'll be constantly spamming. This alone is great, but that's not all. At C6, she'll increase the party's attack speed, which makes a notable DPS increase to Arlecchino and makes playing her feel way better. Now, you're not going to see the difference the attack speed makes on Arlecchino's damage numbers, but believe me, you can absolutely feel the difference. To me, this makes Yunjin one of Arlecchino's top supports, so if you have her, be it for this team or any other of the teams I've shown you, it's a good idea to dust her off and play her again. Now, once more, if you play this team, Arlecchino will be quite vulnerable. Granted, if you know your enemy's attacks and can dodge them with no problem, this doesn't really matter too much, but if you want to be more safe, say for the Abyss, you can slot Zhongli in once more. Beyond any personal buffs he'll bring, Zhongli will enable the added bonus of the Geo Resonance, which will increase the damage of Arlecchino, so this is another worthwhile variation for this team comp. All in all, there are tons of variations you can make with this team. Instead of Yunjin, you can play Kazuha, Sucrose, or any other buffer. The possibilities with this team comp are many, so be sure to let me know how you're building this team, or any other of the teams I'll be mentioning. Anyhow, on to the next team, which involves a reaction many may have forgotten, but should make a comeback. I'm talking about none other than Overloaded with Chevreuse. Now, before I get into the team, I can't mention this enough, Chevreuse in this setup is mandatory. She is the sole reason that enables Overloaded to be viable and effective, so you absolutely need to play her in this team for it to work. The quick TLDR of why is that she'll increase the attack of her party, as well as reduce the pyro and electro resistances of enemies. This of course is huge and honestly redefining when it comes to the reaction. It's a huge buff to it, but this all comes at the cost of having only pyro and electro units in your team. While this can be very restrictive, you're still able to make good use of some great units and build team comps around them. For example, Fischl. Fischl is a staple when it comes to electro units. She's incredibly easy to play, deals high and virtually constant electro damage with Oz, and generates a ton of particles. You can never go wrong with playing her, and while this team is no doubt good, to make this team take that next step, I'd recommend adding another sub DPS to make it even better. Which brings us to our next variation with Beidou. Beidou is a great pair with Arlecchino, since not only does her burst synergize with Arlecchino's normal attacks, her burst will provide some much needed damage mitigation. On the flip side, there's Yae Miko, who also performs quite well in this team. In certain aspects, she's a better and stronger version of Fischl. Normally I built her for her burst since her burst deals stupidly high damage, but casting it and recasting it constantly gets pretty annoying, and it also gets in the way of Arlecchino's field time, so it's best to just build her for her skill. And it's also worth noting that while there are many great options for building your Arlecchino specifically for Overloaded, say for Crimson Witch or the Dragon's Bane, you don't have to go all out and make an entirely different build for Overloaded. Given the strengths of crit and certain artifact passives, my case is probably like yours where the normal crit build actually beats out the Overloaded specific build. Well everyone, these are all the teams I have for you today. In truth, there are many more teams you can play Arlecchino in. If there's any favorites of yours that I haven't mentioned, please let me know in the comments. I know some people are doing Melt with her, over Vapin, other teams like that, but these are the teams that stood out to me the most. I hope you try these teams out, and if you do, please consider liking and subscribing, as well as letting me know which of the teams I mentioned is your favorite. With that said, thank you all for watching, take care, and thank you all for watching once again.